Hi, Neal Gittleman here, Artistic Director and Conductor of your Dayton Philharmonic Orchestra. Welcome to Take Note for the first Masterworks concert of the 2021-2022 We're Back and Better Than Ever season of your Dayton Performing Arts Alliance. I am so excited that we're getting back to concerts in the old-fashioned traditional way, and so glad that you're going to join us for them. Take Note for many years has been a part of our Masterworks. Hi, Neal Gittleman here, Artistic Director and Conductor of your Dayton Philharmonic Orchestra. Welcome to Take Note for the first Masterworks concert of the 2021-2022 We're Back and Better Than Ever season of your Dayton Performing Arts Alliance. I am so excited that we're getting back to concerts in the old-fashioned traditional way. And so glad that you're going to join us for them. Take Note for many years has been a part of our Masterworks concerts. Take Note, if you don't know about it, is a half-hour pre-concert preview of what's going to happen, sponsored by our great friends at the Dayton Philharmonic Volunteer Association. Traditionally, I or Associate Conductor Patrick Reynolds, or sometimes a guest, will speak with the audience starting an hour before the show from 7 to 7:30. And then at 7:30, the orchestra comes on stage, and then at 8 o'clock, we begin. Now, because of the health situation with COVID and the Delta variant, and because we're being extra careful, we decided that at least for this first Masterworks concert of the season, we probably shouldn't do a live Take Note. And so we're doing this virtual one instead as a little experiment. I hope you'll enjoy it. You'll hear a little bit from me and also some discussion I've had recently with our two guests for this concert. First, Austin Jaquith, composer of our opening piece, Heldenleben 2020, and then Philippe Quint, violin soloist for the Mendelsohn Violin Concerto. And then I'll be back at the end to tell you a little bit about Beethoven's Eroica Symphony, which closes the program. Thanks so much to the DPVA for making Take Note possible, even in these strange times, but especially thank you for being here with us. My first guest on Take Note for the opening concerts of the season is Austin Jaquith, who wrote the piece which begins our program, Heldenleben 2020. As you can tell from the title, it's a piece that was written in the midst of the pandemic about a year ago. Austin, it's wonderful to have you with us for Take Note, even though we can't do it in person on the Schuster Center stage. Welcome. And can you tell us a little bit about how the piece came to be in the first place?
Sure. Well, we were all sitting in lockdown. I was thinking of things to do, and I wanted to go just on a practical level to just do something for the Dayton Philharmonic. When I wrote you that initial email, I just said, I'd love to write you guys a piece. The piece itself took this idea of, what is heroism and who are our heroes in the situation we were dealing with. And it occurred to me that, unlike traditional heroes where there was a solitary figure, a warrior perhaps, an adventurer that goes out and fights the depths and the heights and everything else, we actually had a number of different heroes that were all facing unknown events in ways they would have never anticipated, when they signed up to be an Amazon truck driver, or the medical community, of course, is more used to crises and infectious things and dangerous diseases. But many people, first responders of all kinds.
Right, and grocery clerks. We never thought of grocery clerks as doing a dangerous or heroic job, but certainly in the peak of the early days of the pandemic, we thought of those people as heroes, because without them, we couldn't get our groceries.
Right. And, for those of us that were in some sort of lockdown and were just doing our jobs on computers, we didn't have that risk, and they were out there on the front in a way we weren't. And yes, we all greatly admired and appreciated those efforts. So this piece I really wanted with this piece to to honor those people that were doing that. And so the title Heldenleben 2020, which means roughly a heroic life 2020, is a spin on a Strauss piece, Ein Heldenleben, a heroic life. And so I've got a couple of different musical ideas that are sort of in tension or in actually an outright battle in this piece. We've got the music that represents our heroes. We have an initial motif from the original Strauss piece that was part of the inspiration. And we have some music that represents COVID spreading and proliferating. I don't know if you remember, the Washington Post had this interesting graphic early on showing how, a single individual infecting those around it would just kind of just quickly spread to everybody. It was quite graphic, and I actually used that image to produce one of my motifs. And I just opened this piece that it was a chance for the musicians to put their experiences and for the audience to take in this experience in a musical way that was hopefully compelling and interesting, and did the things that we want artists to do with, big events in our lives.
And it's interesting, well, two things. One, the little motive that you designed to represent the virus. One of the ironic things about it is that I missed that the first time we did it. I remember we did an interview like this for one of our concert night radio broadcasts, and you said that, and it suddenly hit me that, oh, yikes, that's what that was. I remember in rehearsal, I said to the musicians that when that figure came in, I asked them to really make a fast diminuendo so the tremolo sort of became a background effect, kind of a texture, almost in an impressionistic way. And I realize now that to really have that sort of viral component and the component of danger, that before they do that, they really have to emphasize the accent that you write on the first note. So we hear so that it has a little more intensity and a little more danger to it. So that's one of the changes that I will make interpretation-wise. Let's talk a little bit about the assignment of this piece,
Sure.
Because when we talked about it a year ago during the summer and you were starting to work on it, the context was it was going to be the opening piece on a streamed program where the second piece would be Beethoven's Fourth Symphony. And for practical reasons, and especially because at that point we were just working on trying to figure out how to put more and more people on stage. I think we had maybe 45 or 50 musicians who were going to play this streaming concert. And so I gave you the challenge of writing a piece that sounds like the sound world of Austin Jaquith, but using an orchestra that was designed for the sound world of Ludwig van Beethoven 200 years earlier. And now for this performance, I gave you a second challenge, which was because I really wanted to play this piece again, because naturally the pandemic is still with us. The heroes are still with us. But I also, we're going to have a bigger orchestra on stage. We're going to have just about everyone on stage. And I went to you and said, Austin, I want to do your piece again, but would you mind expanding it for a full orchestra? And I'm sure that was a proposition you didn't mind, getting piccolo, getting English horn, bass clarinet that you didn't have before, a harp, and celesta added to the orchestra, to say nothing of percussion to add extra colors and textures, and we only had timpani in the original version. So can you tell us a little bit, how do you, having solved the compositional problem of how do you write a piece that sounds like you when you have Beethoven's orchestra, how do you then take that piece and reimagine it for the larger orchestra that typically you would have gotten if it had just been a normal commissioning situation?
It came down to making everything just a little bit more rich. And then the extra instruments, of course, like you mentioned, the celesta you can add, it's like you're adding just a little bit more color. The colors are already there, but they're maybe a little bit more brilliant. It was just a matter of, filling in colors, mildly shading things a little bit more heavily than I did in the first example. And it wasn't a monumental effort or anything like that.
But
But
I found it particularly interesting to see how you used the percussion instruments to add, especially the unpitched percussion instruments like cymbal and woodblock and bass drum, to add that certain je ne sais quoi to the music,
yeah,
especially, just a cymbal roll here to add that intensity behind everything else, or the percussive effect of the woodblock in particular rhythmic things. It's really interesting, and it'll be fun to have ultimately the two pieces side by side, so that it really is a perfect lesson in how an excellent orchestrator uses the gift of extra instruments to add colors and add shadings and add, as you said, depth to the sound. I
hmm
think you did a marvelous job, and
oh, thank you.
it'll be fun to have this slightly larger version. But most importantly, it'll be so much fun to play it for a live audience
Yes,
rather than people sitting at home watching it on a screen.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, it was certainly just a great opportunity for me. I am just so pleased that the orchestra is taking this piece on, and the first time around was a wonderful experience, and I'm have no doubt that this next time around will be wonderful as well. So thank you very much.
Indeed. Thanks for the piece, Austin. Now I welcome our soloist, Philippe Quint, to take note, our virtual take note. Philippe, you were last with us, I looked it up, 14 years ago, almost to the day, performing the Bernstein Serenade with the Dayton Philharmonic, and now you are back to play the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. Welcome to Take Note, and welcome back to Dayton. It's been too long.
Thank you. Great to be back. And soon, great to be back in person.
Absolutely. So let me start with what might be kind of a crazy question, but so the two pieces that we're talking about, Bernstein's Serenade from the past and the Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto coming up, those are both violin concertos, despite the fact that Bernstein called it a serenade. But they're very, very different pieces. The Bernstein has this patina of Plato around it and this story of what each movement is supposed to represent. Whereas the Mendelssohn is, and I don't mean this in a bad way, it's just a piece of music. So I'm just curious, as a performer, as a musician, as a violinist, do you approach those two pieces differently? One, because it has a story and this philosophical stuff behind it, or is it just music that you play and you have other things to worry about besides Plato and Leonard Bernstein? I'm curious to know.
It's a great question, and my philosophy is to dedicate as much time as possible in terms of history of the work. I love when the composer writes out a story in addition to music narrative. Spoken narrative or written narrative is just as important as in the case of Bernstein Serenade. Of course, Plato's Symposium is a fascinating piece of literature, first of all, just to start with. And, to have that background is certainly easier in the creation of interpretation, because a lot of parts and the effects that Bernstein used in his music correspond directly to the texts of Plato. So when you have several drunk Greek philosophers making statements about love, you see it in the music. You see those effects in a second movement. When they're crying, when they're praying, whatever they're doing, it's all in the music. As you mentioned, in the case of the Mendelsohn Concerto, yes, it's, I guess, a little bit predates of the program music, or rather program music for concertos, because that is something that we did not have probably before Bernstein. I could be wrong, I could be forgetting. I mean, of course, the Berg Concerto also has a fantastic story, but there is not a full narrative there.
And there is, to a certain extent, there's Harold in Italy for the
Harold in
viola
Italy.
Players. But
not as extensive, not
No.
as extensive as Plato's Symposium.
Sure.
So my approach towards the music, it's always been a theatrical approach, if I may say so, because whenever the story is not written by composer himself, I create one in my head, and I just look directly into the time period when the work was written and what was happening. I think we need to mention a very important fact here, and that is that before Mendelssohn, we don't have that many violin concertos that emerged. If you just think about it, you look at the 16th century, 17th century, so you have Bach concerti, then which were forgotten before Mendelssohn didn't rediscover Bach, by the way. We have to give Mendelssohn a huge credit for that. You know, imagine if he didn't discover Bach. Then there's a huge leap there, because you actually have to jump directly to Mozart concerti, which is late 1700s, 1775, somewhere there, if I'm not wrong. And then from Mozart, it goes directly to Beethoven. And from Beethoven, which I think is 1809, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we jump directly to Mendelssohn. And of course, Mendelssohn wrote his first violin concerto when he was 12, the D minor one. And then the E minor one that we are performing is one of his last orchestral works and one of his last big compositions. So you literally have, in 2 centuries, you have an absurdly low amount of concertos that were written, and of course, in case of Mendelssohn, again, I'm sort of answering your question, but I am of course digressing into a more of a global vision of where we are historically, because I think for me this is the most important.
Now, mind you, this is the soloist prerogative, because I feel my job as conductor is I follow the soloist wherever the soloist may go. So it's not just in performance, it's in the interview too. So please digress to your heart's content, Philippe.
Great. So in the case of the Mendelssohn Concerto, it's really a revolutionary piece at the time. In terms of structure, in terms of harmony, Mendelssohn really leaped from the long orchestral introductions into a very fragile beginning, where the orchestral introduction is only bar and a half, and the violin enters immediately, and it's giving you an immediate heart palpitations there. This is not a beginning when you can kind of sit in the audience, slowly have a warm-up period when the concerto develops, like Tchaikovsky, like even later Brahms, because they sort of jump back into a long orchestral introductions. Mendelssohn really just gets you right from the start and never lets you go.
He's emoting from the very second bar.
Entirely, and it's probably to this day, I think it's probably one of the most passionate, one of the most exciting pieces to perform and to listen to, most importantly. One thing is just us on the stage enjoying it, but for the audience, it is always a tremendous experience, because it's a little bit of a journey from beginning to end. And Mendelssohn also very cleverly did not separate the movements.
Right. It's really one big piece.
It's one big piece, and I just love that, the last movement has such an infectious amount of positive energy. No wonder Walt Disney used it.
Yes, it is. It's such a delightful ending. I mean, I love the whole concerto, but the finale is one of those things I wish it could go on forever, because it's it's so happy. And even when it has its slight moments of a little bit of tension, that the happiness is right. And then there's that big buildup at the end, and it's just perfect.
Absolutely, which is why I think it's been called a number of times the perfect concerto. It really is what it is, the perfect violin concerto. And I think you probably get the same question, which is, how do you approach works that you have done hundreds of times, and then you come back to this repertoire? Do you find something new? Uh, how do you begin? How do you begin the journey? What is your take on this? If I may reverse the table just for 1 second.
Sure, that's fine. Again, following the soloist. I think, especially with pieces from the repertoire like this, as a performer, as a conductor, which is kind of like a performer, I always try when I sit down with the piece again to pretend that I don't know it at all and try to see it as if it's the first time, which is, it's a game, of course, because you know what's going to happen when you turn the page. But I think it helps you approach the piece from a fresh perspective, but more importantly, it prepares you to be delighted and surprised by the surprises, even if you know the surprises are coming. And I think that's the true test of greatness, but not just greatness, but of the sort of long-term, over the centuries, value of a piece of music. If it continues to surprise you and continues to make you smile or make you cry or whatever it's supposed to do, time and time again, even if it's the 100th time, then that really is a special piece of music. And certainly this concerto is one that never wears off for me.
One of my personal strategies is I just buy a new score.
Oh, that's brilliant.
It really is tremendously helpful. You have basically a blank canvas once again, and you create on it. And I'm not saying that everything I did before was wrong. It's just that I'm no longer bounded by that.
Right. And if you go back to it, you've rediscovered it and decided,
Correct.
Yes, I was right when I did that.
Yes, and exactly. You get to rediscover, you get to reevaluate, and hopefully you get to improve.
And
that's for me. Yeah, that's for me is probably the most important thing. Is to, in music there is never limit. There is no. I don't believe in perfection. I think perfection is a wrong word when it comes to music. I think it's an eternity of a search that we go for, which is why we're able to perform Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, 100 times, Seventh Symphony, Brahms, Mahler, Bruckner, and we go back, and it's just there's no bottom to where we can go musically and where we can experiment and how we can use our experience and utilize imagination and creativity. And I guess that's the wonderful process about what we do.
Well, Philippe, this has been so much fun to talk to you about this piece. It just makes me more excited that we're going to play it together, and I can't wait to do it. And
likewise, I'm very much looking forward. Very much looking forward.
So travel safely, and we'll see you live and in 3 dimensions very soon in Dayton, Ohio.
Thank you so much, Neal. Looking forward. Bye.
So a little bit about the final piece on the program now, Beethoven's Eroica Symphony. This is the piece which originally was scheduled to close the 2020-2021 season, but of course that got all jumbled up. And I thought the Eroica Symphony, with its connection to heroism, would be the perfect piece for us to play as we, kind of latter-day heroes, go forth into the new world of performing concerts and listening to concerts in the COVID era. So I could tell you all kinds of things about Beethoven's Eroica Symphony that you read in program notes and liner notes and CDs all the time. I could tell you about, how Beethoven was starting to go deaf when he wrote it. I could tell you the whole long story about Napoleon and the dedication to Napoleon, and then Napoleon crowned himself emperor, and then Beethoven got mad and crossed his name off and changed the dedication to Heroic Symphony in memory of a great man. Yeah, everybody knows that. I could even tell you about how the Eroica is so special because it's by far the longest symphony that anyone had written up to this point. The first movement alone is longer than most of the symphonies of the early 19th century. And the whole thing taken together is about twice as long as the longest symphony that anyone had written up until that point. Instead, I'm going to tell you a different story, and it's the story I always think of when I conduct this piece. And of all strange things, it has to do with an old TV show that ran in the mid to late 70s on ABC, an hour-long drama called Family. You might remember it. Seda Thompson starred as the matriarch of this family. And strangely enough, the Eroica Symphony came up in one of the episodes. I think it was fairly late in the run of the series. The mother of the family decides she wants to go back to school to, I can't remember if it was finish her degree or get a master's or something, but she's a musician. She's, I think, a piano player. And she goes back to school and she has to write a paper about the Eroica Symphony. And this whole episode is how she just doesn't know what she's going to write. And I'm thinking, oh, this is Hollywood. They're going to come up with just the stupidest thing. And finally, the night before, she gets her inspiration. She writes what turns out to be this fabulous paper. And I'm thinking, all right, what's she going to say? And the gist of her paper is that Beethoven's Eroica Symphony was revolutionary for lots of reasons. But the most important thing about it, the most revolutionary thing about this symphony is Beethoven's use of dynamics, volume, in other words. That this is the symphony that got way louder than anything anyone had ever heard. And it also got way softer than anyone had ever heard before. And that was what made it really unique, that Beethoven had just expanded the sound that the orchestra could make at both levels of volume. And I heard that and I thought, damned if Hollywood didn't get it right, because that is the really incredible thing about this symphony. Because anyone else could have said, oh, I'm going to write a symphony longer than anyone else, and just kind of rolled on long notes after notes after notes. But it was Beethoven, and maybe Beethoven, this man who was going deaf, who explored the extremes of volume. And I should have known, because one of the people behind this show, or on the show, Family, he played a secondary role in it, was the actor and musician John Rubinstein. He played, I think, the ex-husband of one of the daughters or something like that. But he also wrote the music, the theme music for the show. And most importantly, John Rubinstein was, in addition to being an actor, he was a musician. He was the son of the great pianist Arthur Rubinstein, and he knew his music. So I suspect that John Rubinstein had a little bit of script input. But in any event, every time I conduct this piece, in fact, every time I hear this piece, I think about that TV show and that moment when, maybe the one moment in history when Hollywood actually got it right. Beethoven got it right too, and we will try very hard to get it right when we play for you at this concert. Thanks so much for watching this Take Note virtual preview. Maybe if things are working smoothly, we can try to do Take Note for our second Masterworks concert live, the way we used to do them traditionally in the theater. Just sort of stay tuned. We'll let you know if it'll be a live Take Note in the theater at 7 o'clock in November, or whether it'll be virtual again. But I'm so glad that everyone in our audience, is coming back to concerts. It means so much to us that you will be there listening to us, and we will play our hearts out for you. So thanks for watching. Thanks for coming. Take care, and I'll see you at the Schuster.